This
RSTP.
conference will now be recorded.
Call the meeting to order for the CMAQ RSTP Prioritization Subcommittee. I don't know if we want to go ahead and bother with taking any kind of a roll count.
Yeah, Alex, I can run through the attendee list if you'd like, so we can all know who all's in the room.
Okay, that'd be great.
Great. The first name that I see here is Kate Gibson with GWRI Connect and GWRC. We've got Matthew Lehane from the FAMPO team, as well as Stacy Fink from the FAMPO team as well. Alex Osiak from Stafford County, the Amin, City of Fredericksburg, Brandon Brown, Stafford County. Got a couple callers that I'll come back to in just a second. Got Eric Nelson from the City of Fredericksburg, Jordan Chandler, again with the FAMPO team, Paul Agnello, Spotsylvania County, Stephen Haynes, VDOT. And I just got a note from Paul in the chat that they're having a little bit of trouble with audio. So we'll make sure that that gets ironed out before we jump in. But before we do that, wanted to see if there are any folks that are only on via phone call. If you please announce yourself.
Hi, this is Ian Ollis. I'm on via the phone.
Morning, Ian.
Hi.
And is anybody else just on via the phone and not on their computer? Okay. Alex, I think that's everybody, but did want to give Paul just a minute to see if he wanted to test out his audio. Paul, do we have you on the line? Can you hear us?
Good morning. This is Spotsylvania.
Hey, Paul. Good morning. Wanted to make sure we had you before we jumped in.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, Adam. How you doing? It's Rodney.
Hey, Rodney. Good morning.
Great.
So, Alex, I think that that's everybody. There's a few other folks that were on the invite list. Bob Schneider from DRTC, Ciara Williams from DRPT, and Christine Hefner from VRE, who I don't believe are here, but wanted to give them a chance to announce themselves if they happen to be. Great. Well, with that, Alex, I think that that's everybody in the room accounted for. So happy to turn it back over to you, or we can jump right in and start going through some of what we've got to present.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Yeah, I don't think we really have a, kind of a formal agenda set up for today. So I think we'll kind of just run through the information you sent out last week. And I guess if we could start kind of with the, the minor editorial changes we made that really doesn't touch on the RSTP CMAQ prioritization process just yet. If we could kind of look at those first.
Sure thing. I'd be happy to run through those. So thankfully, there's not too many to sort of get this document current as far as administrative modifications. First thing that you'll notice is in differing documents that we have, sometimes we refer to the bucket of funding as RSTP, other times STBG, which I think is the more current kind of accurate term. So we just wanted to acknowledge that in this document for clarity. We also update the name of the technical committee from the FAMPO technical committee to the technical advisory committee, again, just to get that current with the times. And then we also update the table that we talked about as far as year of expenditure and obligation rather. And I believe, Alex, that is pretty much it. We cross out 2045 LRTP since at some point within calendar year 21, we'll likely have the 2050 done. So I think that is pretty much it. There are no substantive changes in this document. So does anybody have any questions or critiques on the administrative updates that we made to this?
I have one. This is Eric. Quick question. Why do we have to include that whole chart of dates? Can't we put that in a short paragraph as to when this occurs?
I think we definitely can, if that's what the group would like to change this to, so it's a little bit more readable and user friendly. We're happy to just spell out what the requirements are.
I mean, it's all July 1, so what the heck?
Right.
So this is
Would anybody oppose?
is there somewhere in the document that kind of talks about what the expenditure limits are kind of for regional STBG and CMAQ?
Yeah, Paul, I think that this paragraph here kind of spells out what the timing provisions are. So I think that this might suffice without the table. So we could simply remove the table rather than reworking it via narrative, since we already have these couple paragraphs in here.
So the table is kind of an example. I mean, I don't have a strong opinion on this. People want to take it out. I think it was just in there to give a visual example of what the regulations were.
Yeah, this is Kate. I was going to suggest, you could just leave like 1 year as an example, because I do think it's a little bit confusing that the, I don't know, if you scroll back down to the table, it's like 2019, but it starts in 2020 and it ends in 2023. Like it might just be nice to have one example and then you can just add to that to get to the current year.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So it sounds like from the group, what we'll do, we'll take out this table and then just list out an example or two underneath this narrative right here. Does anybody have any objections to that?
Sounds good.
That works for me.
Any other feedback on this document in particular?
So Adam, this is Paul. I went through it. I didn't see anything regarding the administrative changes. So I said we're good with it.
Okay, well then I guess hearing nothing else from the group, I guess we can go ahead and kind of consider those changes agreed to by all, and we'll kind of keep that one set aside, and we'll present that, make the changes to the chart and present that to the full FAMPO committee in January. I guess we'll go ahead and Adam, I guess you pull up the presentation here. We'll kind of move on to the more in-depth changes to the RSTP methodology you proposed.
Hey, Alex.
Yes.
This is Kate. I know I missed the last meeting, but just a point of clarification. Will any edits that come out of this group be shared with the full TAC before they go to the policy committee?
Yeah, that's our intention is, whatever we've kind of decided here as the subcommittee, we take this to the full TAC committee for review and vote, and then eventually take that to policy committee.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Well, Alex, I'd be happy to jump in. Jordan and Matthew and I are going to split these slides up. It's quite a bit to get through, but I think that the detail is important for this group in particular. So I'll go ahead and tee this off a little bit and then hand it off to Matthew. So just a little bit of background and sort of talking about the purpose of kind of this subcommittee and what it was established to do. So the idea for us, based on the marching orders, right, that we got from the first subcommittee meeting a few weeks ago, was to sort of develop a matrix of sorts, or a table that spells out kind of the two-tiered approach that we spell out in here as far as whether a certain project category is feasible to measure a benefit to the TMA, and then if so, how to do that. And then our kind of thinking for this meeting in particular is that it would be a workshop of sorts. So if there's any holes that folks want to poke in our approach or any critique, this is the time and place for that, certainly. So of course, we all know at this point we have the part of the Washington urbanized area in northern Stafford County that's designated as a TMA. So at this point in time, that is what we're referring to as the TMA urbanized area in the FAMPO region. So we have our 6 project types as well as a handful of subtypes. And so what we wanted to do essentially was, again, go through and address for each subtype whether it was feasible to measure a benefit to the TMA, and then if so, how and with what metrics. And this just sort of spells that out in a little bit more detail. So the thinking that we went with for kind of this first iteration of this proposal for the update is to apply a 10% weight to any given project that's eligible to receive TMA points, that it would be 10% of that project's overall score. So we would take the original score, multiply that by 0.9 to sort of effectively squeeze that down to 90%, and then have that last 10% be the measure for the TMA benefit. And so we said that for this initial approach here, and again, this is open to critique, that if a project is not feasible for measuring benefit to the TMA, that we would simply leave the original score as is. So that's the approach that we're going with here. So this table is essentially kind of a summary of each of the different project types, whether it's feasible, what measure we're proposing to use, as well as the scoring, and then a few sort of extra notes for this group. And so this table is what we're going to take once it's sort of finalized and put this into the more substantive changes version of the methodology document. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Matthew, who's going to run through the first category, and then Jordan, who will run through the remaining categories.
Hey, Adam, this is Paul. Can I just ask a couple of kind of quick questions? With regards to this methodology, is the intent that this would just apply to the regional STBG funding, or is this intended to apply to the CMAQ as well?
I think that's a really fair point of clarification. I'm not sure, Paul, if we say that explicitly in these slides, but that is the intention, that it would only apply to the STBG.
Yeah, I would say that that's a clarification point to make. And then just with kind of this chart here, kind of like, is this matrix or chart kind of only applying to the regional STBG?
Yes. So the entire presentation is specific to STBG, not CMAQ, as far as the eligibility for funding based on this benefit to the TMA metric.
Very good. Thank you.
All right, Adam, if you could move to thank you. So the first section was the roadway capacity projects. So this is a part of what you guys went over at the last subcommittee meeting. So what we did was we took that and put it into an analysis. So I selected 6 projects, 2 in each locality, and these are some of the recent projects that have been submitted. And they are mapped on the right side for their locations, as well as you can see where the TMA is as well. Next slide. So we already went over what streetlight data is, but just quickly, basically big data platform that allows for a bunch of different matrices and analyses. For this particular study, we're going to look at origin and destination matrices with the streetlight volume metric. Next slide. So for the roadway capacity projects, basically looking at the proposed projects and see over an average week, for example, how many trips through the proposed road/intersection project start or end in the TMA shapefile, and then score the project based on its total trips. So really the decision point for the subcommittee, one of them is, do we only include minor arterial and higher projects, or all roadway projects for consideration, regardless of their classification? So what we're looking to do for this specific section is complete an origin destination analysis twice. So one for the project segment, and basically the project to the TMA, and then one for the TMA to the project. And the output will be 2 streetlight volumes, which will be added up for a final number. And the volume is defined as an output type for measuring the daily average volume of vehicle trips in a particular area over the given period of time. Next slide. So just looking at the specific projects, we have the Route 3 STAR study at I-95 off-ramp improvements. This is the polygon in the streetlight portal. Next slide. Lafayette Boulevard roundabouts. This is the polygon in the portal. Next slide. Route 208 Lafayette Boulevard and US 1 improvements. This is the polygon used. Next slide. US 1 and Market Street turn lane improvements. Shown here is that polygon. And then US 1 and Enon Road intersection and roadway improvements. And then again, here's that polygon that was used. Next slide. And then Route 1 and Telegraph Road / Woodstock Lane intersection. So this is a little bit of a different case study than some of the other projects. This actually has 2 polygons because it's really 2 different points. Next slide. So basically, we did that analysis in Streetlight, and shown here are kind of those results. So you have the original score of the project, and then you have the A and B. So the TMA to the project and the project to the TMA. And then on the far right, the total of A and B are totaled up for kind of their total average streetlight volume. So we can see Route 1 and Telegraph had quite high volume because it is up there in the TMA. Next slide. And then each project will be scored based upon this volume in relation to the TMA. So as an example, here's our scoring matrices. Of course, this is up for debate, but just an example here, this is what we used. So anything that had less than 1,000, such as the Lafayette Boulevard Roundabouts project, it would score 1 out of 10. And then so on, 1,000 to 5,000, 5,000 to 10,000, 10,000 to 20,000, kind of scaling up as you go. So the project with the lower volume received the lower points. They need to get higher, greater than 20,000, such as that project that we showed, Telegraph and Woodstock, would receive a full 10 out of 10 points because that has the most benefit to the TMA. Next slide. So as Adam mentioned, we're basically doing a 90% score. So if a project score is 80, we're going to multiply that by a 90%, and its score would be given a 72. And then benefit to the TMA, it would get up to 10 points. If the project receives a 6 out of 10, that score of a 72 plus a 6 equals 78. So the project received a 78 out of 100. So instead of its original score of an 80, it would now receive a 78. Next slide. And here are the final results shown of all of those scoring matrix. So highlighted are the kind of 2 sets of scores that we kind of came up with. The original score times 90%. So this is what everything gets changed to. And then also shown is the rank, so how they ranked before the TMA score is added. Then you have the TMA score, so many of the projects received a 2, Lafayette Boulevard received a 1, Enon Road received a 3, and then Route 1 and Telegraph received the highest marks, received a 10, because it was over that 20,000. And then those TMA scores are added to the original 90% score. So highlighted as well on that right are the final scores that they received. And then you can see as well the change in rank for what they were beforehand for the TMA score to what they are now with the TMA score. So a couple of notes. We've tested this category as well with particular different weights and can pull that up if need be. So say instead of 10%, look at 5%, 15, 20, 25, and 30%, kind of depending on kind of what is best to be used here and what everyone thinks. And then second, if it would be beneficial to throw in additional real world and hypothetical projects to have a better sample size, that is also something we could do. So we could add more projects to this to see how more projects would affect it, say 10 or 20 projects instead of 6. And that is all for the roadway projects. I will now pass it off to Jordan.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Adam. The first category is transit and TDM for this next section. And so I want to make a note that when picking these projects, we looked mainly at the category that they were scored in rather than the funding was used. So these projects were picked just based on the category, not if they were STBG and CMAQ. And as mentioned earlier by Paul and Adam, that these methods will be only used for STBG projects. So I just wanted to make that clarification before we move on. And so here are the projects that we picked for the transit and TDM. And then on the next slide, we have the locations of these projects. So we have the leased commuter parking spaces for Chatham Square, Claiborne Run, and the Fredericksburg Fieldhouse. And the next slide, please. And then the 2 VRE station improvements at Leland and Brook, both in Stafford County. Next slide, please. And then the Garrisonville Quantico bus route from Fred. And the next slide, please. And so what we looked at here is the original score, whether these projects were feasible to measure benefit to the TMA. and if these projects were within 1 mile of the TMA. And on the next slide, we explain that in more detail. So there are 4 subcategories of the transit and the TDM section, and some of them are feasible for the scoring metrics and some of them are not. So the first one, vehicle replacement and new vehicle acquisition, is not feasible because we cannot ensure that a certain bus, van, or rail car will be used in a specific area at all times, or if that will even be changed for different routes. And then the next one is transit operating assistance. So this one is feasible for services within 1 mile of the TMA or within the TMA, but this excludes any capital or operating project costs for the VRE, since these projects are not feasible since they provide a benefit to the entire region rather than just the TMA. So if the project is deemed feasible and it is within 1 mile of the buffer TMA area or within the TMA area, the project scoring would be shown in this example. So within 1 mile or inside would receive 10 points out of 10 points, and further than 1 mile would receive 0 points. And again, VRE projects are not eligible. For the new commuter parking lot and parking lot expansions, if the proposed project or lot is inside the TMA, it would receive 10 out of 10. And then again, if it was outside of the lot, it would receive 0 out of 10. And then lastly, the transportation demand management, that is not feasible for measuring benefit to the TMA since that is a region-wide benefit. And then on the next slide, we have the scoring scenario. So this one is for the bus route Quantico. This is just the example of that project. We would multiply the original score by 90%, take that score, and if applicable, which in this case it is, give up to 10 points. And so this project would receive 10 points since it was within the TMA area, and the total final project would be then moved to 73 out of 100. And if you move to the next slide, this is kind of just a little matrix showing which projects are and are not feasible, what their final score would be. And so for the first 2 projects on the list, they are not feasible. So we again would keep the original score of the project since they're not measuring any benefit, but could benefit the entire region. And then specifically the Quantico bus route, that one would be able to be measured and receives a 10. And so that would be the final scoring and ranks for those projects with this measure. And then if we move to the next slide, we're looking at PE studies in the region. And so we have one project.
Are you going to take questions? Hello?
Yeah, we can take questions at the end.
Okay.
The next would be for the PE studies, one from each jurisdiction, and we can move to the next slide. So this is just an aerial view of the Fredericksburg train station in the next slide. And then this is just a Google Maps view of Route 1, and the project would be below Commonwealth Drive in the next slide. And then the Route 610 operational study, again, from Route 1 to Onville Road. And the next slide, please. And so this would show what measures are needed to analyze the benefit. So we'd have the original score if the project is within the TMA, if the project is located on an interstate or principal arterial, if it's within 3 miles of the TMA, or if it's outside of 3 miles of the TMA. And a caveat for this is, for example, the Route 1 Massaponax is located on an interstate principal arterial and is further than 3 miles. We'd give the project the best possible scoring that it could get. So in this case, we'd measure it based on the interstate, not that it's further than 3 miles. So on the next slide, these are kind of the breakdown. So we can measure these based on the distance from the TMA or what facility type the project is located on. So if it's within the TMA, it would get 10 out of 10 points. If it's on an interstate or principal arterial, 6 out of 10 points. If it's further than 3 miles, it would get 4 points. And then if it is if it's within 3 miles, it would get 4 points, excuse me. And then if it's further than 3 miles, it would get 0 points. And these are based on functional classification since it improves regionally, or since these projects are regionally significant and would overall benefit the TMA. So the next slide, please. And so this is an example of the Route 1 Massaponax scoring. We take 90% of the original score, and in this case, it is applicable for benefit. So we'd measure that, and that would receive up to eight points since it's on that principal, arterial, or interstate. And then it would receive a final score of 53. So if we look on the next slide, this is overall, again, with the original score, the multiplication by 90%. And then if it receives benefit to the TMA based on that scaling of 10, 8, 6, or 4, or 4 or 0, and then the final score, and then the final rank of those projects. And then the last category is the non-motorized, so pretty much bike and pedestrian. And so all these projects within Fredericksburg, so those are the examples we have, the Idlewild VCR Trail Connector, and then the next one is the Kensington Lake, or Twin Lake and Kensington Bike Connector. And then the next slide is the example scoring, or that these are not within 1 mile of the TMA. And then the next is the reasoning for this. So each project can be based on distance. 1 mile is the typical distance that a pedestrian would walk to access a service. So within 1 mile or inside of the TMA would receive 10 points, and further than 1 mile would receive 0 points. And then the next slide is the example of the final results. And neither of these are within 1 mile, so they would both receive 0 points, and that is their final score and rank. And then the last slide is for questions.
I had some questions. This is Christine with VRE. Going back to the transit TDM samples, you indicate on slide page 24. Yeah. So you indicate transit TDM improvement type, transit operating assistance for the VRE improvements at Brooklyn Leland. Those are capital improvements. Those aren't operating assistance.
Yeah, so if we go back, I think it might be 1 or 2 slides, Adam. So capital and operating, oh, maybe forward 2 slides. Sorry, my mistake. Here we go. Capital and operating projects are not applicable for scoring since they would benefit the entire region, so they would not be feasible to be scored.
Well, why is the bus operating assistance feasible?
So the rail would provide a service throughout the entire region. The bus have specific routes and locations, so that would make it able to be measured if it was within the TMA or within 1 mile of the TMA.
Okay, hey, Jordan, can I jump in for just a second to?
Yeah, of course.
Christine, for your question in particular, we don't have a category in the existing methodology for transit capital improvements. So the way that project was originally scored, from what we're able to tell, is that it was under the transit operating assistance category, since that was most closely applicable. So that's why it's within this sort of subcategory.
Okay. So any bus service would have to begin and end within the TMA or within 1 mile of the TMA boundary. Is that correct?
Oh, or it could pass through the TMA, so begin, end, or pass through.
Well, then how is rail service that passes through the TMA not eligible?
It would not receive any measures of benefit, but it would also not be subtracted any points. So it would keep the original score. So there would be no positive or negative.
Keep the original score. But I'm still not clear why a bus could potentially receive additional
Christine,
scoring for TMA when if it passes through the TMA when a rail service would not.
Christine, this is Alex. I think I might be able to provide just a little bit of clarity on that. I think what we're looking at here is for regional services like VRE and things like that. We're pretty much looking at a pass-through scoring there, where their scoring wouldn't change at all. They wouldn't be docked at the 90%. It would just be a pass-through, like they're getting the full 10 points, as you would assume, for like a TMA benefit. Whereas things like transit, well, they might just have one route where they're looking to expand service down there in the south end of Spotsylvania County. And, okay, well, how much of that benefit would that really provide to the TMA versus, say, a new bus service, running up and down Garrisonville Road? So I think that's where there's just a little bit of difference between, you know, the bus and more of the VRE train service.
Okay.
This is Eric. I've got a question. It seems to me that the distance from the TMA seems a bit random. The federal rules for NPOs is to develop metropolitan-wide solutions, but the distance of the TMA seems a bit, you know, like it came out of the air. I'm not sure that that's going to be seen as legitimate. I think I understand the way you're looking at this, and there's a certain logic to, you know, not, like, for example, VRE projects not losing points and regional benefit, you know, being recognized. But the distance to the TMA and this whole sort of spelling out benefit to the TMA seems a bit problematic. I think we need to figure out a way to describe this better.
Eric, which project subcategories do you think that the distance-based metric is arbitrary?
Oh, I think they're all arbitrary. I think distance to the TMA has. I mean, I can understand the roadway issues, but everything else seems a bit of a stretch with, you know, distance to the TMA. Basically, because the TMA is not the deciding, or isn't typically the deciding factor in how funds are allocated. I mean, we're kind of pioneering something new here. And again, it just seems the distance is, well, like when you were talking about, you know, parking lots and such. I mean, it's just, or even the PE projects. It seems like this, we can make this applicable in certain categories, but maybe some categories it's really not a very logical thing to do. I'm wrestling with this. You can tell.
I share Eric's concern in that, like, you guys have obviously put some thought into this, and you were like, okay, if it's within a mile, you know, in terms of pedestrian, you know, a person might walk a mile, so you put the mile buffer. But then what if it's a bicyclist? You know, maybe they would go 3 or 4 miles. And it could be the same type of improvement that you'd be proposing, something that would involve both bike and ped. So, but you gotta pick a number. And so, you know, I don't know how you could. Yeah, I guess you could have different, you know, factors for different types of features, but that gets real complicated too.
So if I can just chip in at this point, I mean, the brief, as I understand it, was that we needed to come up with a metric to show benefits to the TMA of these various transportation improvements of whatever kind. So if we're going to show benefit to the TMA is a geographical metric. It measures a specific geographical area. So we have to try and come up with metrics in each category for the geographical benefit of that transportation improvement to the TMA and include it as one of the criteria for ranking projects. That's our brief. That's what we've been asked to do. So what we're doing here in this proposal is to pick a metric. We've chosen 10% of the total score as being the metric that we measure as benefit to the TMA. And then within that 10%, we have to come up with a matrix to rank projects that are not always similar or easily relatable. So in the bulk of cases, the distance to the TMA is the metric. But we recognized immediately that some projects like VRE are of benefit to the whole region. So it's impossible to measure distance from VRE to the TMA as the particular metric. So we don't do that. We exclude that from a particular calculation. So as I'm listening to the comments, I'm understanding that people are saying the approach generally is fine, but some of these metrics, we don't like the way that the geographical metric is applied for various reasons, because it doesn't seem to capture the spirit of what we're trying to do, or whatever the case is. So that's fine. What I think to move this forward, what we then need is some counter proposals for those particular items where you don't believe that it's working well. I get that. There may be one or two items or modes of transportation where the metric isn't working well for us. So that's great. If we could identify which ones we don't believe are working well in this matrix, and perhaps an alternative way we could explore that particular item, then we could do some more work on those particular items. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I would add that perhaps for some of those categories where the metric doesn't seem to work, we be open to the possibility that maybe that category doesn't need to be strictly evaluated for benefit to the TMA. And I would suggest something like non-motorized travel, PE studies, for example. Those may not be appropriate to be measured against TMA benefit, but that's just my thought. But yes, I understand what you're saying.
Okay, does anybody else have any comment on those two particular metrics, the non-motorized and the PE studies?
I would agree with Eric on the PE studies or planning studies of not really of excluding them from this scoring. I just had a question too, to clarification on parking expansion. You say expanding a VRE parking lot at the Brook Station, which I believe is within the TMA. Would that be something that would be considered a benefit?
The Brook parking station, I believe, is not within the TMA.
Not, okay.
Yeah.
I believe it is just outside of that blue 1 mile buffer that Jordan has shown on the map.
Okay, it's hard to tell from here in the map. Okay, so that would not be eligible, or would not be given this extra scoring.
That's correct.
And the same would apply to unless other commuter parking lots were within the TMA or the blue area, they would not be eligible for the extra scoring either. Is that correct?
So for the new commuter parking lot and expansions, that's only within the TMA, so the blue 1 mile buffer is not applicable.
Okay, so it would have to be physically within the TMA.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, this is Paul and Rodney. We had a couple of comments. One comment is basically with the projects that have regional benefits. It might be kind of worthwhile kind of defining kind of what types of projects those are. I know we mentioned the VRE projects would fall in that category, or something maybe like the northbound river crossing would fall into that category. But just to clearly define that would probably be a good thing. Another comment to go to piggyback on something that VRE said earlier on. Our understanding is the existing kind of methodology for transit does allow vehicle replacements and purchases. It wasn't just for transit operating, so we wanted to clarify that. And I guess with regards to these buffers around the different project types, I've just been kind of listening to what everyone's been saying. I do kind of agree with what VDOT said, that having some more consistency with that, I think, would probably look better and function better. I recognize that not every situation is exact, but when you try to basically have a methodology applying across many different modes, it's good to have some level of consistency. And I guess I'll just use the example of the new commuter parking as an example. With that, it seems like it's all or nothing. It's either like within the TMA, or it gets points. Outside the TMA, it gets nothing. I guess I use the example of like the Brook VRE station, which is a little bit outside of the TMA area. That would obviously have benefit to the TMA, but basically with this methodology, if they were to expand the parking there, that would give no benefit.
Yeah, this is Kate. I was going to kind of mention something similar to what Paul said about the parking lots. I think, in our experience, folks might travel from outside of an area to another area with a park and ride lot if it's on the way to their destination. So whether the parking lot is in the TMA or not might not fully capture whether the residents of the TMA are going to utilize that parking lot as a part of their trip to work. So I don't know what the implications of that are, but I do think there's a little bit more of a nuance there than maybe what's being captured with the current proposed methodology.
This is Eric. I think you could make the argument that parking lot expansions related to transit ultimately do benefit the TMA. So I wonder if we need to maybe look at maybe a dual categories. One category being regional benefits, such as transit and parking expansions, et cetera, and then others more specific to the TMA. I mean, roadways is a really easy one to measure, but again, I'm wrestling with this. We're sort of going counter to the federal rules, and I don't see a clean way to do that. Not that I'm willing to be convinced. I'm wrestling with this.
Well, and I'm like becoming more concerned, I guess, as this discussion goes on, to Paul's point that sort of having a defined boundary for a parking expansion is, it's either in or without. It is somewhat arbitrary because, like in the example of a additional parking at the Brook station, it is going to benefit the TMA, and I think you can look at the catchment area for the Brook station, and it's going to include much of the area that is within the TMA. So I don't really agree with the rationale that if it's physically outside of the boundary of the TMA, that it's not benefiting the TMA.
Yeah. No, good point. I mean, again, we need to always recognize the regional aspect of what we're doing, even as we're trying to make sure the TMA is being properly addressed.
All right, so what if we just added, especially for this metric right here for the new commuter parking and parking expansion, what if we went ahead and added, say, if a parking lot or is outside the TMA, or again provide a distance within 5 miles outside the TMA, or it gets this score if it's outside of 10 miles, or it gets this score. I mean, I think to Ian's point before about this is a geographic area, and kind of using the geographic distance as a metric, it provides some, good metrics to how to rate these projects, at least for a good starting point.
Well, it's
one
good
thing
unless
one thing we know. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
What I was saying, one thing that we do know, for example, VRE, every trip, no matter what station, goes through the TMA. If you look at other transit, if you look at the park and ride lots, for example, you could probably very quickly find out the actual percentage, but it's a very, very, very high percentage of every vehicle that parks at a commuter lot in the city of Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania County. Probably 85% go through the TMA. So those are very easily defined benefits. They shouldn't be ignored. They should be promoted. So I very much favor, giving the maximum amount of points or a scaled amount of points based on the utilization through the TMA, which again is very high.
This is Matthew Lane of FAMPO staff. Just to add to Stephen's point, I think one of the issues that staff had when we were trying to figure this out is kind of how to score projects like commuter parking. And if there is a metric, I think as Stephen mentioned, such as utilization, that you all would see fit to score it, definitely open to something like that rather than just giving it a 0 or a 10. We want to make sure everything is based off of a certain number or distance rather than just kind of giving it a random score. So if utilization is a number that can work to score, and we have utilization numbers for parking lots, then that can definitely be an option.
This is
What
Kate.
do you mean by utilization?
That was just the word that Stephen had thrown out, so I'm just using that as an example.
Well, I was going to say, I think utilization might already be a metric for that category. I could be wrong, but.
This is Eric again. We might be making this more difficult than we need to. I mean, for things like VRE and park and ride lots, et cetera, we could, I mean, rather than trying to measure impact at TMA, we could probably just make an assumption of significant impact and not have those as one of those categories that needs to be measured against TMA impact. It's implied, it's accepted, and it's very regional. So why go through the contortions for that particular category?
Yeah, this is Adam. I think that's a really fair point, Eric. I mean, I think it's really easy to make a case that any commuter parking lot is a region-wide benefit. And is that by extension a benefit to TMA? Sure. So, I would offer either don't count it at all and just go with the original score as far as benefits to the TMA, or just say any commuter lot is going to get the full 10 out of 10 because it's a region-wide benefit, even if the commuter lot is in Pennsylvania, for example.
Yeah, I think that, yeah. Yeah, I think there's certain categories we can focus on and make work. But yeah, things like transit just aren't. Or at least rail transit is not. I mean, our scoring anyways has to measure regional benefit. What we're trying to do is shoehorn in the benefit to the TMA, and again, in some categories that's easier done than others.
Are we saying then that there's some consensus that commuter parking lots should be treated the same as the VRE rail system, or is there some other angle that I'm not capturing?
That would be my call.
Treated the same, but not necessarily factored the same. I think, again, VRE, every trip goes through the TMA, whereas you could very easily, again, find out what percentage of trips from the various bus services and such go through. It, again, it's very high, but it's certainly there's a potential that a lot of folks are utilizing commuter lots in say Spotsylvania County that may be going more locally or even to the south to Richmond. So it's, that's a possibility. So you'd have to, factor, and again, that could be just mileage or, if we have other data,
Hey, this is Paul. I just wanted to add on to Stephen's point that with SmartScale, there used to be a census tool that the staff used to figure out where the users of existing or prospective park and ride lots would go. I would kind of, show kind of to the north, west, east, south, and you would have kind of a sense of the distance. And if the FAMPO staff, could find and use that tool, they could basically do exactly what Stephen said and kind of try to figure out for the various commuter lot improvements, kind of what benefit would there be for the TMA.
This is Kate, is that something that we want staff to kind of look into, how feasible it would be for them to use that as a metric and find the data to be able to complete that?
When I say it was just kind of a free census tool, like you don't have to be a rocket scientist to use it if it's still there, but I know that WIPI has used it in the past. I'm not sure if they're still currently using it for Smart Scale Round 4. I guess that's something, you know, the VDOT could ask, but it should be accessible.
This is Kate. I think it makes sense on the surface. I mean, I would want to make sure that that's, you know, accessible data and, you know, something that staff could easily use. But I think that the theory behind looking at where folks are traveling from the commuter lot versus just whether or not the lot is within the TMA makes more sense for what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, this is Alex. I can agree with that for sure. If we can find some kind of metric, especially for like a commuter parking lot, to provide some kind of measurement to see what that benefit is, I think is well worth it. Because I think, like you mentioned, for transit parking expansions and things like that, VRE parking expansion, I mean, those probably provide more of a regional benefit. It's hard to quantify, but you know, maybe a commuter parking lot down in Thornburg, you know, might not provide the same benefit as one up on, you know, 610. So I think there's benefit into looking at details for that.
Well, I would just say that the specific benefit of a specific VRE station, I mean, we have good data based on our master agreement survey and other data of who's using that station and where they come from. So I think that is something that we can provide, you know, that we have available to understand where those people that are parking there are coming from, and they're predominantly, you know, localized around the station.
Okay, yeah, if VRE has that data and that could be included as a metric, then I guess that's worthwhile in including.
But then how
to be clear on, go ahead, Eric.
I was going to say, then how do we measure benefit to the TMA? I mean, you could potentially have the benefit to the TMA could be overwhelming if we measured it a certain way. Again, you know, we can generate and develop this data, but we're trying to measure benefit to the TMA, and I'm not sure how that happens.
I mean, something that I might offer as far as trying to measure actual benefits to the TMA based on where folks are coming from to utilize commuter lots is we could run an origin analysis within Streetlight and then have some type of threshold where we say, and I'm just throwing this out there, we could say if more than 50% of users are coming from within the TMA, it might get 10 points. If 30 to 50% are coming from within the TMA, it might get 8 points, so on and so forth, to where you're directly benefiting users that originate within the TMA that are utilizing a new or existing commuter lot. That's one idea that I'll throw out there.
I can appreciate that, Adam. I can appreciate that, but you're measuring just one thing. If you measure benefit to the TMA by a radical reduction in through traffic that's diverted to rail, then you've got another benefit to the TMA entirely that we're not measuring. So it seems to me that we're grasping at data to measure, and again, I'm going to go back. Maybe this is something that we just don't it seems overwhelming to do this, and it's like, why would we bother with rail and parking lots? We just assume a regional benefit and move on trying to measure something else. Because if we're going to focus on transit, we're going to have to measure all kinds of stuff, or we're not going to necessarily agree on what to measure.
That's where I am on this too. If you think about the benefit, obviously the major benefit that you get from TDM and so on transit is the reduction in trips, primarily on 95, right? Well, if you use that as your primary criteria, then every trip that you take off, or every combination of trips that you take, and every bus that goes through, you're getting this tremendous benefit to the TMA. However, you're not benefiting those along 610, which is the bulk of the east-west axis of the TMA. So, and what Adam was describing more applied to that, because that's the folks that live there. So you almost have like two distinct pieces. How are you benefiting the people that actually utilize and live within TMA, but like Eric points out, they get all the benefit if they use if they're using 95 or trying to commute through the area at all, when those trips are taken off because someone's using a commuter lot in Thornburg, say. So I think that's certainly the bigger criteria to take into account. And then if you do that, it is much simpler to just say it's it applies to any transit TDM, regardless. You could factor it down based on distance or users or origins and destinations through the TMA or whatever.
All right, so is there any kind of consensus then from maybe the group to just kind of think about removing the transit category from, that's this kind of TMA scoring element? I mean, what Eric said, yeah, we've talking about all this data, but does it really show the benefit being provided to the TMA, and what would that be? And to Stephen's point, all these things are regional in nature and provide some sort of benefit, and to try to split hairs trying to dig down through data to find something to measure, it might not just be worth the exercise, where we can kind of just say, hey, it's a regional benefit, let's just leave it at that.
That would be my call, Alex. Again, we could focus then on things that would be more impactful.
I'd be agreeable to that.
So this is Paul and Rodney. We're okay with that change.
Stephen.
Alex, this is Adam. Sorry, Stephen. Thank you. Alex, this is Adam. So just to be clear, so we're saying that although possible, we're saying it's not going to be feasible to measure benefits to TMA for all four of the transit subcategories. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, I think we're clear on that one, so we'll make that change. As far as planning studies and PE non-motorized, is there consensus on direction for our staff on those two categories?
This is Eric. My inclination would be to pull those as well. Planning and non-motorized. Those are going to be tough to measure against TMA benefit. I think TMA is going to be your roadway capacity, freight, et cetera. I think that's where we're going to find our benefit.
I would say at least the planning PE. I mean, you don't have any tangible improvement that comes out of that to really provide any physical benefit.
This is Alex. I mean, I think the non-motorized certainly can show the benefit to the TMA there, and I think a distance metric is a good one to use. I mean, maybe you have something different for bicyclists. You know, if you're doing a shared use path or a roadway bike lane versus just a straight sidewalk where you'd measure just pedestrians and have different travel lengths for that, where a bicyclist maybe pedaled 3 or 5 miles and a pedestrian only walk 1 or maybe up to 3. I'm not sure. And for the planning and PE studies, I don't know. I think again that could have. I mean, most of our planning studies here for FAMPO seem to be kind of regional in nature as they are. So I'm kind of torn on this one, but again, I could see where, hey, you might have a study that's down in the city or the south end of Spotsylvania that just doesn't provide the same benefit that it would to the study up on North Stafford would.
I think the challenge then, Alex, is that Spotsylvania is going to be hard pressed to. I mean, a planning study in Southwest Spotsylvania may be critical, and yet it doesn't measure. It's not even remotely close to the TMA, but could still have a regional benefit.
And I think our scoring metric could show that, where, hey, it's showing the regional benefit, and it's just not getting this, the 10 points maybe for the TMA. And if it's, that good of a study, I wouldn't think, the 10 points would really make or break it, really.
Right.
I mean, that's one thing I did see going back through this analysis. It really seemed to have the largest impact on kind of the roadway projects more than anything else across the spectrum.
Yeah. Well, at this point, I guess maybe we press ahead with. I mean, we've dropped 4 categories. We still have 5. Let's press ahead and try to make those 5 work, with the understanding that we still might drop 1 or 2 if it really isn't working.
This is Alex again. Adam, I don't know if it'd be beneficial for kind of the group to maybe send their feedback on then those last 5 categories, the roadway, ITC or ITS. Well, I think intermodal freight, I think we've eliminated that really, and just look at planning and non-motorized and kind of send you back our comments on the metrics you proposed, and maybe see if we can kind of collaborate those into some kind of, I don't know, matrix or just a synopsis to push back out to the group for our next discussion.
Yeah, I think that works on our end. I think that the only thing I'd add is if there's any kind of consensus on, or even not consensus, but any kind of requests for us to look further into a certain data set or to, take a different approach on one of these, in order for us to have something back for our next meeting on the 18th, that I think we ask for any feedback or, requests to be to us by the end of the day on Wednesday this week.
I guess for me, the only thing I'd look at would be maybe for like the non-motorized and just kind of looking at the, really the extents of a pedestrian would really walk and a bicyclist would ride, to kind of look at, possible metrics for those two.
And also another suggestion that as you look at the PE and studies, I'm looking at like where the TMA is located, and if you go to the farthest point of Spotsy, it's probably 30 miles, let's say, from the from the TMA. If you were to do something like simply say what is the closest point of a particular study, for example, maybe you start out with it's 10 points in the TMA, and then for every 3 miles outside of that until you reach the closest point of the study, you reduce it by 1 point, and that way you'd have 0 by the time you got to the end of the thing. So if it's 6 miles, it'll get 8 points. Maybe this is oversimplifying it, but that keeps the city of Fredericksburg and the areas of Spotsylvania up close to Fredericksburg getting 6-7 points Whereas, yeah, if you're out in Brokenburg or somewhere, maybe you only get 2 or something, or at Lake Anna, But that you could do just something as simple as that, just kind of have a radial decrease every 3 miles by a point. Just a thought.
Stephen, that was for studies.
Yeah, that would be studies. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
This is Paul. I think what Stephen said is very reasonable.
Yeah, this is Eric. I would concur.
All right, I kind of agree with that one too. So maybe we just knocked another one off the list here.
Great. Well, I think we're actually pretty close in that case. So we can dig into, Alex, like you said, to looking at what non-motorized might look like as far as potential users and how far they might travel, that sort of thing. So we can definitely do some more work on that end. I think that there's generally consensus on the planning and PE. So I think we can, present different tiers. I know Stephen mentioned, every 3 miles. So we'll sort of test that. What would it look like for every mile, every 3 miles, every 5, so on and so forth, to see what that sort of the difference in benefit would be over the course of the geography of the region. So we can definitely do that. I did, though, before we wrap up, and I know that we're a little bit over time here, wanted to circle back on the roadway projects and see if anybody had any particular grievances or critiques of what we're proposing as far as volume. We do have a relatively small sample size here with 6 projects. Like Matthew mentioned, we can increase that sample size with other projects that are out there to look at sort of a greater set to see what the different tiers should be. But just wanted to see before we wrap up if anybody had any specific thoughts on either of these 2 slides.
Adam, this is Eric. This actually looked like it would work. So I thought this was well done.
Yes. Just as Alex with Stafford, I kind of echo that. I thought the using the street light here for the roadway was a really good way to use that data and provide a good, solid analysis for the scoring.
Okay, great. Well, in that case, I think we've got our marching orders for the meeting on the 18th. So we'll do the same thing as last time and try and send out some documentation by, we'll say, at least next Tuesday, give or take, might be Wednesday, for review, given that it's a smaller subset of information this time around. Have a discussion on the 18th so that we can then the next week sort of summarize everything and get everything in our meeting packet for the TAC meeting on January the 4th. And then Kate, to your point earlier, all of this will be presented in full at the TAC. So what we'll probably do, since that's a broader meeting, is we'll put all of the information from these slides once they get adjusted in the packet, but we'll probably have a quick little 8 to 10 slide PowerPoint for the TAC, just to keep everything a little bit more condensed.
And then you want comments from us by Wednesday?
If there's any further kind of direction or requests for looking into a specific thing, just to give us enough time to do that, Eric. But if it's just general feedback, that can be really at any point over the next week and a half or so.
Okay.
All right, great. Well, Adam and Ian, thanks for all the work you guys and your staff put into putting this together for us. I really appreciate the kind of breakdown and kicking this thing off and getting it moving here. So looking forward to seeing this again next week and hopefully get some to the TAC and Policy Committee.
All right. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.